From extending his first tax cuts to slapping, that's the only thing. That's the only word to use with tariffs, isn't it? To slapping more tariffs on Chinese imports, President-elect Trump is hoping to reshape the U.S. economy. Join us now to talk about what could be ahead. This is going to be ugly, this debate. I'm telling you, not. Allison Schrager. That shows just how crazy things are. Allison Schrager is at the Manhattan Institute, a senior fellow. The Manhattan Institute. You have pictures of Adam Smith everywhere, don't you? And Friedrich Hayek. And then on the other side, Natasha Sarin, professor at Yale Law School, home of Jeff Sonnenfeld, in the Yale School of Management and a former Treasury Department official. And believe it or not, you guys agree on most things about tariffs, do you not?
Yeah,
you had a meeting in the green room, and you were doing a lot more nodding than arguing.
When I try to be positive about it, I tell myself I always wanted a world where we had lower income tax rates and more consumption taxes. And maybe, I mean, we shouldn't single out imported goods for consumption taxes, but maybe it's a step towards that.
But you know, Allison, it's hard to view where we are today, 3 days removed from the election, as anything other than a pretty significant referendum on inflation. And it's a referendum not just in the U.S., it's a referendum kind of around the world. And we economists can talk about the rate of change of prices, but real people are feeling that the price of eggs is 4 times higher today than it was 4 years ago. And in that environment, it strikes me as pretty wrong-headed. And I hope that this is, Trump has been saying promises made, promises kept. I hope this is a place where he's promises not really kept. Because in that environment, 20% across the board tariffs, that's the most inflationary policy of my lifetime.
I mean, 20% across the board, absolutely. Of course, I said, I don't know if this is going to happen because he's also singling out certain kinds of income and it should be across the board. In theory, if we did have much lower income taxes, that would compensate. Of course, I think people hate inflation even if they do have income increases because, people just hate seeing prices go up. I mean, on the other hand, I'm an ardent free trader, always have been, it is of the school I was, but even China in some ways does challenge me sometimes. I mean, it was bad that we were getting all of our antibiotics from China. And the fact is that so much trade was coming just from one country is troubling because, I mean, as a free trader, I always feel like the beauty of it is diversification. Now, I'm not sure a trade war with China is the best way to solve that problem, but I think it does deserve some thought and reflection.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between a strategic use of tariffs in particular industries, in particular situations, and across the board tariffs on every country and every industry.
Let me ask you this, though, because we could talk about antibiotics coming from China. We could talk about all sorts of other industries, including chips, and what we should be doing here. Yeah. The question is, what is if we're going to do industrial policy, how do we do it, and how do we do it better than we've done it thus far? Because I think even the CHIPS Act, which I think was a very well-intentioned effort, it is not clear that we're going to get to the other side the way it's structured today.
Well, I don't think we should do industrial policy. I guess, I mean...
But by default, we're talking about industrial. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to put tariffs on, and if we're going to not do it across the board, then we actually are talking about industrial policy. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, though I don't think we have cracked the code on how to do it properly.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why...
Well, maybe it is a bad thing, in which case then
usually
we shouldn't be doing it at all. But then we're left exposed.
It's either neutral or bad.
Well, we're left exposed. Think about, by the way, putting aside tariffs, think about the consolidation that's happened among doctors by private equity firms in the U.S. Is that free market? Yes, that's free market. Is that good ultimately for the country? I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could also argue there's a lot of distortions in the market that sort of create that. I mean, I think what gets less attention and got a lot less attention in the Biden administration is I see subsidies and industrial policy as just the other side of the coin of tariffs. And I mean, ideally, again, certainly with the medical profession, we have all sorts of distortions that probably are pushing, making private equity, pushing it towards that. I mean, if we just sort of had more deregulation or allowed more people to be doctors, maybe that would be a better solution.
So, I am actually quite pro deregulation. in particular contexts.
Oh,
we
right.
need to make it.
This is cats and dogs sleeping together. This is like the bizarro world.
We need to make it easier to build stuff. We need to make it easier for small businesses to start up. I hear a lot of, and I'm very sympathetic to those views. I think this idea that we shouldn't care that that's sort of your point, Allison, that antibiotics are in China, that we shouldn't care that the U.S. doesn't really have any real capacity or didn't have any real capacity prior to chips to think seriously about chips production in the United States. That's a matter of, that's not a tariff policy. That's not a sort of particularly, that's an economic policy, but it's also like a national security priority, and it has to be first order. I think chips did a lot of good. And I think going in this direction, what I've been nervous about over the past few days is the concern that what is going to happen in a new Trump administration is a lot of the good that's been done on some of these dimensions is going to be rolled back. And I hope ultimately that's not going to be the case. But I think you should be worried about it.
One of the things that's happened, and maybe you can look at me, and I'm trying to be introspective on a 2 or 3 days after an election like this. Joe and I have had lots of debate about EVs in the United States and the industrial policy that's come across in the last, call it 4 years, around trying to create charging stations and the like. And one of the things that's been pointed out to me repeatedly is
it's a pretty nice one that they got
he says there's just one of them. I think there's more than one, but there's not many, is the point. And the question is, why is that? And can you make industrial policy actually work, right?
No.
The answer is no.
Well, if the answer is no, then I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the right answer is.
What the Manhattan Institute calls Trumponomics. The hell is it?
Trumponomics?
What is
sort
it?
of the Oprah Winfrey of taxes. It's
I've
a tax
heard that.
cut for you,
tax cut for you.
Well, it challenges us because we tend to be very
I like
fiscally
Oprah, so I always think
I hear you. But, Andrew, one thing you just said in the last segment I wanted to kind of bring back, which is the idea of the importance of, democracy and fairness as kind of a governing principle of how we approach tax policy seems like super important.
Fair is such a nebulous term.
I know you don't like it, but listen, no tax on tips is a very good example of something I hope Trump walks back.
Okay.
No tax on tips.
How about if I work till July 1st for the government? Is that fair?
If you work, my view is if we take these sorts of policies where we preference certain types of income in the tax code, carried interest, I know another hobby house of yours, is another good example.
Just on the edges, it doesn't help. I mean, I know there's a perception.
There's a perception, and that's part of what's happening here.